dedicated to empowering you with information
to make positive choices
and be advocates for your overall well-being.
Welcome to The Health View. Welcome to The Health View. I'm Yvonne Dunetz, and today we will be talking about a purposeful opportunity to reflect on a life lived as we answer the questions, why have a funeral and what preparations are needed? My guests are Andrew Hall and Alicia Applebee. They are funeral directors and embalmers at the Davis Funeral Home. Andrew Hall has been a licensed funeral director and an embalmer since 2001. As a licensed funeral director and embalmer, he can handle all aspects of funeral service and is eager to help continue the fine traditions of the Davis Funeral Home. He is also a member of the New Hampshire Funeral Directors Association and the National Funeral Directors Association. Andrew has been actively involved with the Davis Funeral Home since he was 16 at that time. He would help with maintaining the grounds and building, maintaining and driving vehicles, and helping his father before, during, and after funerals. Alicia Applebee served her apprenticeship in Western New Hampshire and has remained a licensed funeral director and embalmer in the state, specializing in restorative art and post-autopsy and tissue organ donor cases. Welcome.
Thank you.
Really appreciate your being here. We know that this is a topic that is not an easy one for anyone. We like to think that we're going to live forever, but the fact of the matter in life is that we all are here to live hopefully a very purposeful and long life, but the fact is we will all die. So why? Why have a funeral?
Well, it's probably one of those most important questions. I think funerals are meant to celebrate a life, honor a person. There are religious aspects, but I think most of it is to honor that life and have a purpose or a meaning for that life.
And how does one go about arranging for a funeral? When do you, in fact, what it is that we look for? What information do we need to even think about it? Do we wait to just the last minute when our loved one dies, or is there any preparation that we can do beforehand?
There is preparation beforehand. We do serve pre-need and at need. Pre-arranging is a way to, before someone passes away, put some ideas and thoughts and put some financing in order. That way, when the death does occur, the family left behind and friends know that it's already taken care of. And that is very, very helpful to them. Mentally and financially, and it's a great relief that I've seen.
Because people are able to, while they're alive, share their wishes.
Exactly.
Exactly what they would like to be done.
They have been, and today more people are willing to talk about it. It's not always a topic that people like to discuss.
Right.
It's difficult, but I think today we have found that there are people that are talk about it more freely. I think when families know that they can call a funeral home or talk to a director a long time before anything occurs, that just to get those ideas or what can happen today, because there's no such thing as a right funeral today. Traditions change and mold as we move forward.
So what is the most important information that people should ask when they pick up the phone to call a funeral director? First of all, how do they decide on the best funeral director to go to get this information? And are all funeral directors the same, or are they different?
Well, I mean, just like any other place or business, that you would inquire about, maybe someone who would come into your home and do work on your home. There are different professionals. There's many funeral homes, many types of funeral directors. There's women funeral director, there's men funeral director.
Are there certain qualifications that people should look at that the funeral director has, that the home has?
I think most funeral homes in any state across the country, most of them have to be licensed by a state board of funeral directors and or embalmers, depending on the state. So they are inspected and looked at. most funeral directors today have to have some type of education, whether most require some type of at least an associate's degree level of education to answer some of those questions for folks.
Some funeral homes are family-owned, like the Davis Funeral Home, and some funeral homes people don't realize are corporately owned, so that could make a difference in how an arrangement is made.
Okay, so what types of questions should people ask?
Some of the basic questions, I think sometimes they will ask based on their religion. Can you handle certain types of, whether it's a Catholic, Protestant, if they're
Muslim,
non-practicing,
Hindu,
or Muslim,
whatever.
Hindu, Judaism, Jewish services. I think those are questions that people ask.
Do all funeral homes take care of all of the different populations?
Not all funeral homes. There are some funeral homes that are very
They specify.
There are Jewish funeral homes that just have Jewish, that take care of just Jewish funerals or families.
Okay.
There are funeral homes such as ours that will probably handle every religion, any denomination, from everything from the strictest of religions to what a family wishes to do today.
And so what you're saying is there are a different process that occurs based upon your religious background
Absolutely.
as far as how you treat and care for a body and the
Yes.
preparations of that.
Right.
So that would be one of the questions people would ask. What else would they ask?
A lot of folks ask maybe sometimes what type of information needs to be obtained for.
So what should they bring?
Most families, we ask if they're bringing in information for an obituary as basic family information, parents' names and spouses, children, or whatever relations there are in a family. We may ask them to type up something beforehand or send them some information by email or mail it to them just to what a hobby, what families like to do, what were their favorite trips that they took, how they meet.
This is a good way to sit down with your loved ones, and you can discuss this together. It's a good way to connect with your grandchildren. It's a good way to connect with your siblings. It's a good way to include everyone in this process.
Of the discussion,
Yes.
talking this through.
And that discussion, I think, also helps with planning services, because a lot of those services can be molded around those memories, favorite activities, or some family tradition that, because every family has different traditions. So
there are different types of services. And the utilization of the funeral home is also, you can have a wake or a viewing of a body in the home.
yes, we have done that.
And you can also have services at a funeral home.
We've had services at a funeral home.
People can choose to have it in their place of worship. They can choose to have it at the graveside.
Yes.
They can choose to have it where else?
We've had services in backyards.
Okay.
We've had them at parks here in town, so that people have just said our gathering is going to be, that's their favorite place.
Okay, so and then what other questions are being asked of them as far as information of choices do they have to make? Do they have to choose certain caskets, cremation?
I think a good place to start would be whether you want cremation or not.
What's the difference between cremation and the other?
Well, the only difference really comes down to the final disposition of what we are going to do with those cremated remains. Are we going to take that cremated body and are we going to bury it in the cemetery? Is someone going to take that home and for a future date, or going to be scattered in a special place, or some burial at sea, something like that? Those are questions that come up with cremation. When it comes to caskets, it's more of which cemetery is this person going to be buried in?
So that would be information that would be helpful for when people come, if they know the cemetery plot and where,
if they know there's a cemetery.
if there's a family plot, a personal
Correct.
plot, and where the body would go.
Right. And if they don't, there are plenty of cemeteries that we can always direct a family to. There are specific religious, cemeteries of, Catholic faith and
Jewish
Protestant,
faith,
Jewish faith. There are some green burials, green cemeteries.
What are green
City-run
cemeteries?
cemeteries?
The green cemeteries are, it's probably an old tradition that may be coming back. The green burials are just burying folks today in the earth, probably in a simple plain pine casket or a shroud or a very simple, it's just one of those old customs that if you see old movies, that's how we did it in the past, and now it's just maybe coming back.
And that's something that people can do. Can they do that on their own, or do they need a funeral home?
They probably should call a funeral home, or at least call the local cemeteries or the local town or city where they're thinking about that, because not every cemetery is green, not every area has green.
And it is a
cemeteries.
new
And it is a newer
idea that different states are handling differently. It's not something that has necessarily been allowed until recently. So it's something that, it may be working with a funeral director just because we kind of know the people to contact and how to facilitate something like that, just because it is so new.
And what about the costs of a funeral? Is there a different cost related to if someone determines that they want to get cremated versus to be buried in a casket?
There can be.
Yes.
It depends. A lot of it depends on what every funeral home that anybody would call or talk to.
Does it differ?
It
The
usually
prices
differs.
differ?
It depends on. I don't know every funeral home, but funeral homes, their costs are usually dependent on, can be a whole different size of the building, staff, things, but a lot of overhead depending on funerals that they do, how many funerals they may handle. There are funeral homes that are very small and take care of local communities, and there are corporate funeral homes that have dozens of branches that are all under one. But I think costs can be determined on caskets can be very simple and plain to very elaborate or ornate.
Personal preference, if you will.
And I think it depends on what their family is asking or what they're.
So there's a menu of services that are gone over with the person when they come in to determine what it is that they wish to have.
Yes, I mean every funeral home has to give any family that asks a copy of a general price list that has an outline of what their costs are and what their how their fees are broken down.
Mm-hmm. And if anybody had any financial hardship, how would they go about getting a funeral? And
I think most funeral homes are willing to work with the family or try to help. Like I said at the beginning, we're here to help honor a life if we can, and everybody deserves a little dignity and a little respect. So I think every funeral home or funeral director has always said we'll at least try to help the best way we can. There are sometimes city services or state agencies that may help. Sometimes people have asked their church or a temple or something for assistance. People have been there to do that.
VA. Now, is it different related to military burials? Or can they go through a regular funeral home, or do they need to go to a funeral home that works with veterans?
You can go to any funeral home.
You can go to any funeral home. We've helped many veterans. We've had veterans that, it depends whether it can be a veteran that has served his country long ago and we're dealing with, a World War II or Korea or something like that or any other. But we've dealt with, unfortunately, folks that have died in service, that have been killed in action. And
Active duty, yeah.
And we have worked directly with that branch of the service. We would work with the Army or the Marines or Navy and coordinate services, because those services, again, could be at the funeral home. They could be at a church, graveside.
Okay.
But we can certainly help that too.
Excellent. So as far as I know now, when someone needs to go into their nursing home or in preparation of that, they're asked to have arrangements made and also have a plot. So this would be while someone is living. Same procedure? A loved one could come in and get that information and be able to prepay for a funeral and all of the things that are needed for their loved one?
Essentially, the process with being in a nursing home scenario is they ask you to spend down your funds. And we assist with that by providing an irrevocable trust account, and that's where money that's put towards a prearranged funeral goes. And that word irrevocable means that it cannot be taken out for any reason other than the person's passing. So that means when they are in a nursing home scenario and the state or whomever is looking at the funds that person has, they are not allowed to touch that money set aside for funeral expenses.
So it secures it.
It secures it, and as long as it needs to be there.
So let's talk also about, let's say someone's in the hospital and dies. Is there a certain process, a procedure that people need to go through in order to connect with the funeral home, if in fact they haven't done so already, to make prearrangements for anyone, any loved one? Or
The process is very similar. I think a lot of it would be that they need to call a funeral home or maybe get a recommendation from a friend or a family member if they have not had that immediate need for a funeral home. And then I think some of those similar questions, that they're going to call a funeral home and start talking and seeing, can we handle that type of arrangements, or what the family might be wanting, where we're going to ask if they want cremation, or are we going to be burying a casket, or are we going to have visiting hours with an individual present, or services with an urn present, or I think that's where the process starts.
And so it doesn't need to be pre-done.
No.
It can be done when it happens, so
Yes.
people don't feel that pressure.
It's essentially the same process as far as questions that we ask. It's just the funding and it's immediate, so there are some decisions that need to be made, versus with a pre-arrangement you have more time to think about those things.
And anybody in a pre-arrangement, you don't have to be in a nursing home to pre-arrange.
Correct.
You can pre-arrange like you have other types of insurances. You can pre-arrange
Absolutely.
this. And I know that a number of people now are trying to make pre-arrangements so that their children or their loved ones don't have to deal with it. So it's all taken care of, and all they have to do is call the funeral home and
that's
follow up.
really how it goes. They just call us and they say, my mother had a pre-arrangement with you, and we pull that person's information and we tell them on the phone, yep, you're all set. And you can just hear the relief in their voice. Yeah.
And I think today, like I say earlier, that we do have the conversation today. People are a little more open to talking about it, or
Yes.
understanding between talking to doctors and hospitals or family members, and people are a little more willing to at least open that door and talk a little bit about what does mom or dad need, or what are we doing for our grandparents. And I think that's where it begins. And a lot of times we'll tell families to spend a lot of time with the family. That pre-arranging is important, but if you come in at that time, we would rather have you spend your time with your loved one versus
Right.
answering
Exactly.
every little, we can figure out details a little later. It's more important to still keep that connection, because that's what we're ultimately going to do, is celebrate that life. So
Yep, we don't want any regrets for people to have the time that they need together to
Absolutely.
reinforce letting them know how much they love them. And so it is helpful, though. Sometimes people get the word in a health situation that they may have a disease, or their time is in fact drawing near. Is that the time where a family can give a heads up to a funeral home and say, we are, with a loved one that is going through the process, we want you to know that there may be an impending call,
Yes.
so that you're at least aware of
Right.
that?
Yes.
Does
We-
that
we-
help
yeah.
you?
It does.
we get calls quite frequently about that someone has moved into a hospice care or some situation like that, and had that same, want to answer those questions, and where do we begin? And we will start that process of trying to guide them in the right decisions. And and I think at that point we still want to emphasize that talk of a lifetime, that it's more important to talk about, to keep the connection with the family, with your loved one, and then we can fill out the paperwork later and answer whatever questions at another time.
Is it different related to the information that you need and the supports that you give if a person is a young person versus an elder person or middle-aged person, or it doesn't matter the age or the sex of the person, male or female, it's the same process for anyone and everyone?
I'd say logistically, on paper, but a human-to-human interaction, it does vary. And, that is part of what we do. We deal with all walks of life. We deal with people who have next to nothing. We have people who are much more fortunate. We deal with, unfortunately, we do deal with, children who have passed away, teenagers. It's logistically on paper, it's the same process. But in the day-to-day, it does differ.
And how do you, as human beings, relate and support to people during their time of terrible crisis and sadness? And
Well, the hard
Some
part
days are
is
harder
we've
than
been there.
others.
There are days that are harder than others, absolutely, but we've all been there. We've all suffered losses that, from losing parents and grandparents to to losing children that are, gone before their time. So we like to say most funeral directors have sat in that same position. We have all, been there for a loss and been at bedsides, and we've got the calls from the hospitals that, for our own loved ones that say, you need to come back. So I think there's we try to, sit with that family and then say, we've been in your shoes. We understand that we're going to walk with you for a short period of time, but we will help you through that service that's going to make it right for you.
I think for me personally is, and I do say this to families, I am a person as well. I am, I may have an odd job, but, I am still a person and I can still be on that level with you. And I do believe that it's sympathy versus empathy. There's a difference between, I've been in your shoes and understand there are some scenarios where, no, I have not been in your shoes. And in that scenario, you be a good listener.
A lot of people are afraid to drive by funeral homes or had never been in a funeral home. Can you give a scenario and help people have a visualization of what a funeral home is really like so that we can put them at ease?
Well, I think that the word home is where we try to say that it is a home, that we're, we have chairs and curtains and staircases and kitchens just like any other home. I think what we try to tell people is that the people that have that adversity or scaredness is that they don't want to go into a funeral home because a lot of times they've gone there because they're there for a loved one or a friend or some reason so they have that. But we try to tell people, if you just come in, it's just a building. We're here to celebrate. We're here to honor some lives. We're here for one another, so let's work at that, and if we can start with that.
I know in some traditions there will be a wake and a viewing of the body. How do you help people prepare for that aren't used to that?
We do have the immediate family usually come in a little early. We bring them into the room, and we give them their private time. This gives them time, to be alone with each other, or ask any questions of us before the general public shows up. So
it's not easy for everyone just to walk in and see some loved ones. Some folks, it's part of a tradition, so they're not concerned about it. But today we have services with, people from 90 years old down to little children come to services, and everyone is part of it. It could be a grandmother that they're there to honor, and they want to share, and they should be part of it. And I think when we try to open it and try to do it as an open door, that just come in, you can walk around anytime, come in when you don't need to be at a funeral home if you just want to
just
knock on the door to say, I need to look inside just so I can just see the inside of the building.
Yes. So some people think that all funerals have an open casket, but that isn't the case. People can choose not to have an open
Absolutely.
one. So that some, with the open casket's an opportunity for them to say goodbye in the tradition that they use, and others that may have the closed might have that so that their memories are those of what they had prior to that.
Absolutely.
So it's options that people can make so that they don't have to be afraid of it. So if we were to summarize the most important information that you would want people to know related to why a funeral and how to be prepared for it, what would we say?
The first part, most important, is calling a funeral home and maybe talking to family members or getting a recommendation and talking to somebody, even if you have to talk to several funeral homes, just to find someone that you feel comfortable chatting with or someone that may have those options that you are looking for that can answer those questions. That would be the
people
first.
Can take an option to make an appointment to come in to talk to you
course.
direct so they can find out how
come in.
comfortable they would be.
Right, and sometimes it can be as easy as just starting as an email today versus a phone call saying to start the inquiry process that way.
Okay, and for preparing, what would be the most important steps? You make that phone call to go into the funeral home. What is the information? What are things people can do to prepare for it?
Talk to your family, first and foremost. Get any necessary paperwork in order, life insurance policies, any thing that you would want included in an obituary or part of your services. Getting those things to people that need to know, your funeral home, your loved ones. If they're in a nursing home scenario, they should know what your plans are. and most of all is just knowing that we're here for you, and any other questions or concerns, that's why we're here. And
So people can prepare for it before,
Yes.
but they can also know in preparations, they can get the information and make the decisions and include it in conversation. But if they don't do that, they can also know that if a loved one's in the hospital, in a nursing home, or something tragic happens, that they can call a funeral home and that they can engage them in the services that they need to help them
Yes,
to
they can.
honor the life of their loved one.
Absolutely.
So that you're accessible and that you also have the ability to get their loved one wherever they are and to be able to transport them to the funeral home so that the preparations can be made on their behalf.
yes.
Is there a national funeral, I know you belong to the National Funeral Directors, is there online any informational piece where people could actually go in and learn information, or?
They can usually go to any funeral home that has a website, or they could go to like the National Funeral Directors Association, their website. They're the national organization of every funeral home.
Very good, so that they could get a sense no matter
Yes.
where they are in
Wherever
the
they are in the
country,
country.
where they can go.
Absolutely.
In addition, at the end of this show, you will all be able to see a few informational bits about what you need to do after the time of death to help you follow up as a family member of who you need to contact, what are the steps that you need to go through in order to help you in this very difficult time. I really appreciate that you're here. I thank you for everything that you do. And for our audience, we extend to you our heartfelt thoughts to help you prepare for the end of life and to live life to the fullest. Thank you. Until next time.